We're now into week 6 of the course, and for this week we take up the issue of examining a social welfare program and the characteristics of the chosen policy or program to look for when you undertake your policy project analyses. For this lecture, we're going to break up this lecture into two different parts. In the first part of this lecture, I want to talk a little bit about APA-style formatting. So many students come in with a background in MLA-style formatting, and so I want to make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of how to format our papers when we submit the projects. And then we'll talk a little bit about the Dolgoff schema, or the Dolgoff framework that we use to examine social welfare policies and programs. And in that schema, Professor Dolgoff, in that reading that you're assigned, he talks about some basic structural components that you should be looking for when you describe your chosen policy or program. And then there's some alternate program characteristics that you should also be wary of. But in that section, there's a whole listing of different characteristics that you might look at. And I'll just highlight some of the ones that are most relevant for our purposes. And then while the paper is not really geared towards evaluating your program, it's not an exercise in evaluating policies and programs, I do expect just a brief section looking at the adequacy, both the horizontal and vertical adequacy of your program. And so we'll talk a little bit about that in the last part of this lecture. But first, let's talk about APA-style formatting. And of course, APA stands for American Psychological Association and their formatting rules. This is now, we're now in their 6th edition of the APA manual, and so we'll follow those particular rules. So there are some rules that'll pertain to each different section of your paper. So there's, of course, the title page of your paper. There's an abstract that's typically required for scholarly or academic papers. I'm not going to require you to include an abstract for your paper, so no need to talk about that section. And then, of course, there are some rules that pertain to the main body or the main text of your paper. And then finally, there's the reference list. And so we'll take a look at the rules that pertain to each of these different sections. But first, we look at the title page and some of the rules that pertain to preparing an APA-style formatted title page. And so you should be sure on your title pages to make sure that there's a title, of course, of your paper, and this should be centered. You should maintain double spacing on the title page, and so there should be the title that appears. You should have all the authors' names, all the people in your group, their names should appear on the title page, of course. And then the university affiliation is also required by the APA formatting rules. One thing that gets tricky often in academic writing is when you have scholars from different schools collaborating, and so there's some special rules that pertain to people with different university affiliations, but that doesn't really apply here. So one note, something that I don't point out in your slides, is that we should also include a running header. And so for the running header, this I'm talking about at the very top of the page. On the top left-hand corner of the page, the words running head should appear on the top left. And it should be using both capital and lowercase, uppercase and lowercase letters. The word running head should appear followed by a colon, and then the title of your page in all capital letters should appear immediately afterwards. So that's the basic rule there, but that whole section should not be more than 50 characters, right? It shouldn't overwhelm the entire title page, in other words. And then the top right-hand corner, the page numbering starts on the very first page on the top right-hand corner, not the bottom right or left, but the top right-hand is where the first page numbering comes in. So those are the basic rules for the title page. And now we're looking at the main body of your paper, the main text. So I just skipped over some of the rules that might be relevant in terms of the abstract. No abstract required, like I said before. And so in terms of the main text, so you may be using short quotations, you may be using some long quotations, and of course you may be paraphrasing some content from different sources. So first, in terms of short quotations, when you bring in short quotations from whatever source you're using, you're going to go ahead, as I show here, you're going to go ahead and bring in the quote. Right, you'll bring in the quote. I say here as an example, students hate APA, for example. Let's say that's the quote from whatever source. And so after that quote, in parentheses, you have to make sure that you have the author's last name. Right, you have the author's last name here. You have the year of publication, and followed by the page number. And so the page number, it's not PG, but it's just the letter P, right, for a single page. And then PP, we have multiple pages. But this is just one page, and so you just put P and then the page number. That's the basic rule for short quotations. And then we have some long quotations that you might bring in. And by long quotations, I'm talking about block quotes or maybe 5 or more lines of quotations. I don't expect you to use block quotes too frequently. I prefer that you paraphrase as much as possible from whatever sources you're using. But in the case of a long quote, I give you an example here. So let's say this is a quote of more than 5 lines. So you'll indent, from the left margin, you'll indent 5 spaces. And then you'll maintain double spacing with your block quote. And so you'll go ahead and pull in the block quote. And notice that the period appears before the parenthetical statement here. You have the period here. In the case of the short quotation, the period appeared after the parenthetical statement. So just a little quirk in the rules there. So the period followed by the parentheses, and then you have the author's last name. Once again, you have the year of publication, the source, and then once again the page number from where you drew that long quotation, that block quote. And then finally, you may end up, this is my preference, it's my preference that you paraphrase as much as possible. And so you're going to go ahead and paraphrase whatever it is that you want to say. So this is an example that I give basically students 8 APA, if that's the paraphrase. And then, of course, in parentheses, once again, you have the author's last name. And then you have the year of publication. And notice that you don't have a page number necessarily for paraphrasing. The APA rules say basically that you may include the page number, but that it's not necessary. So it's up to you whether you want to include the page number or not. And then finally is the preparation of the reference, of the list of references, or some people call it the bibliography. And so that reference list, you want to make sure you maintain double spacing. So no need to single space anything, maintain double spacing. And then you'll include each entry. Each entry will be incorporated into your reference list. And for each entry, after the first line, you have to make sure that the second line, the third line, fourth line of each entry is in fact indented. We call that a hanging indent. I'll show you what that looks like in a second here. But the first line is left justified. It's pushed all the way to the left, but then the second line onwards, in other words, it's indented. We call that a hanging indent. You want to make sure that you alphabetize your reference list. So by last name, of course. So those are some of the basic rules to keep in mind when you're preparing your references. Oh, and of course, the word references should appear centered on the reference page at the very top. All right, so I give you some examples of different sources that you might use. So certainly you're going to need to include a journal article. And so these are the rules for a journal article. Notice that you have the last name. You have the last name first. So that's distinguished from other types of other rules, other formatting rules. And then you have the author's initials. So you don't need to include the author's the first full name. That's another rule that distinguishes APA style formatting. So you have 2 authors, followed by the year of publication in parentheses. And then you have the title of the journal article itself. The quality of online social relationships is the title of that article. So notice that you have both uppercase and lowercase letters. So just the first word gets capitalized. The first letter of the first word gets capitalized. All other words in the title of the journal article are not capitalized. Unless you have a colon, in which case the first word after the colon is also, that first letter is also capitalized. And something that doesn't really appear in the program that I'm using here, it's Prezi, but this is the name of the journal, right? Assuming that communications is the name of the journal, this should also be italicized. Well, not also, but this should be italicized. So longer works, right? The name of the journals themselves, the names of books, longer or magazines, these things are italicized to indicate that they're longer works, as opposed to just this article itself, which is a shorter work. Those things don't get italicized, but this should be italicized in italics, in other words. And the volume number, another quirky rule with APA, is that the volume number will be italicized, but the issue number should not be italicized. So it's not appearing here in Prezi, but please make note of that. And then you have the page numbers. You have the page numbers of the journal article. Now, in the case of web pages, I assume that many students will use web pages also. Once again, you have the author's last name, followed by the author's initials. Right? We're going to use initials in the case of APA formatting. And then once again, you have the date of publication, and then the title of the document. Right, you're going to go ahead and include the title of the document. And this is actually, I just spotted an error on my part, but this word, this D, should not be capitalized. Right, so this is uppercase and lowercase letters. And then at the end of web pages, you're going to use retrieve from, and then provide the URL or the web address from where you drew that source. So books, another type of source you might use. If you use books, certainly the name of the book will be italicized. That's another quirky rule. And then, of course, if you include any sort of lecture material, we're going to treat lecture material like personal communications. And in the case of personal communications, there's no need to include that entry in the reference list. So no need to include that in the back part of your paper, but you just need to simply cite in the body, in the main text of the paper, where you have personal communications. And so this is an example here, right? Let's say there's some content from one of the lectures. We treat that, like I said, as a personal communication. And then you have, in parentheses, you have the author of that communication. You have the lecture, the name of that lecture, and then the date of that lecture. All right, so those are the basic rules for APA-style formatting. And then in the next part of this lecture, we'll look at the Dolgoff schema for examining social welfare policies and programs. If you have a question about APA-style formatting, please feel free to email me. It's just basically a 5 or 10 minute lookup, right? You can just simply Google APA-style formatting, and then you can pull up the OWL website at Purdue, and you should be able to find the rules there.